The Life and Legacy of Benito Mussolini, A Journey Through History and Language. Welcome, dear listener or reader. What you are about to experience is not just the story of Benito Mussolini, a man who rose from obscurity to rule a nation and then fell into infamy. This is also an opportunity to explore the past, to understand the complexities of power and ideology, and to improve your English skills along the way. Whether you're here for the rich historical narrative, the challenge of expanding your vocabulary, or the rhythm of the English language itself, this is your journey. Let's begin. Benito Amilcare Andrea Mussolini was born on July 29, 1883, in the small village of Dovia di Predappio in Emilia-Romagna, Italy. His early life was shaped by two powerful but opposing forces: his father Alessandro, a fervent socialist and blacksmith, and his mother Rosa, a deeply religious Catholic and schoolteacher. These competing ideologies, revolution and religion, sparked Mussolini's lifelong internal conflict. From a young age, he was exposed to political debate, radical ideas, and strong-willed authority. This environment, though intellectually stimulating, also sowed the seeds of restlessness and rebellion. Benito was not an easy child. He was intelligent, quick-witted, and voraciously curious, but he was also hot-tempered and prone to violence. He was expelled from multiple schools, including one instance where he stabbed a fellow student with a penknife. Yet, despite his defiance, he earned a teaching certificate by 1901 and briefly worked as a schoolteacher. But Mussolini's ambitions reached far beyond the classroom. Drawn to the cause of socialism, Mussolini fled to Switzerland in 1902 to avoid military service. There, he immersed himself in Marxist philosophy, labor movements, and political activism. He worked odd jobs while writing for socialist newspapers, advocating strikes, and spending time in jail for his activities. Upon returning to Italy, Mussolini became one of the rising stars of the Italian Socialist Party, PSI. His writing was fiery and his speeches electrifying. He soon became editor of Avanti, the party's newspaper, where he advocated for class struggle, anti-clericalism, and the overthrow of capitalism. However, when World War I broke out in 1914, Mussolini's views shifted dramatically. While the PSI opposed Italian involvement, Mussolini saw the war as a catalyst for revolution. He broke from the party and began calling for Italy to enter the war on the side of the Allies, believing it would ignite a transformation in Europe. His betrayal shocked many socialists. Expelled from the PSI, he founded Il Popolo d'Italia, a new newspaper that promoted nationalism, militarism, and strong leadership, early indicators of fascist thinking. After serving in the Italian army during the war, Mussolini returned to find a country in chaos. Post-war Italy was marked by economic collapse, widespread unemployment, and political violence. Disillusioned soldiers roamed the streets, and strikes paralyzed factories. Sensing opportunity, Mussolini founded the Fasci di Combattimento in 1919. This loose collection of war veterans and nationalists would evolve into the Fascist Party. Its members, known as blackshirts, engaged in street battles against communists and unionists, often with the passive approval of the authorities. The fascists offered a seductive promise: stability, pride, and the revival of Italy's greatness. Although their ideas were incoherent at first, a mix of anti-socialism, nationalism, and authoritarianism, they appealed to those who feared communism and despised liberal democracy. By 1921, the Fascist Party had won seats in Parliament. Mussolini, once a socialist radical, now styled himself as the defender of traditional values and national unity. In October 1922, Mussolini staged the March on Rome, a dramatic but largely symbolic show of strength. Thousands of blackshirts descended on the capital, threatening to seize power by force. In truth, Mussolini waited in Milan, calculating his next move, but the image of a rising fascist force unnerved Italy's leaders. Fearing civil war, King Victor Emmanuel III refused to declare martial law and instead invited Mussolini to form a government. At just 39 years old, Benito Mussolini became the Prime Minister of Italy. He began cautiously, respecting the constitution and appeasing conservatives. But behind the scenes, he was laying the groundwork for dictatorship. He consolidated power, passed emergency decrees, and gradually dismantled democratic institutions. By 1925, Mussolini had declared himself Il Duce, the leader. The fascist regime was in full force. Mussolini's vision for Italy was rooted in control. He outlawed political parties, censored the press, and established secret police. Education was restructured to promote obedience and nationalism. Children were taught to worship the state and idolize Il Duce. He used massive propaganda campaigns to glorify his image, always depicted as strong, fearless, and wise. Parades, slogans, posters, and films turned Mussolini into a myth. Economically, he launched public works projects, drained swamps, and built roads, earning some praise for modernization. But his corporatist model, where workers and employers were grouped into state-run syndicates, failed to create real growth or solve structural problems. Women were told to stay home and raise large families. The regime offered financial rewards for childbirth and viewed motherhood as a patriotic duty. Civil liberties were virtually non-existent. Obsessed with recreating the Roman Empire, Mussolini turned to expansion. In 1935, Italy invaded Ethiopia, defying the League of Nations and sparking international outrage. The war was brutal, marked by chemical weapons and massacres, but Mussolini emerged victorious briefly. In 1936, he allied with Adolf Hitler, forming the Rome-Berlin Axis. Though initially skeptical of Hitler's extremism, Mussolini grew to admire him, even adopting Nazi-style racial policies in 1938. Jews were banned from universities and public life, a stark betrayal of Italy's long-standing Jewish community. Fascist Italy also intervened in the Spanish Civil War, supported Franco's rebels, and invaded Albania. Mussolini's foreign policy was bold but reckless, alienating Italy from its former allies and pushing it into dependency on Germany. In June 1940, Mussolini declared war on Britain and France, expecting a quick victory. But the war did not go as planned. Italy's military campaigns were disastrous in Greece, North Africa, and the Soviet Union. Italian forces were overwhelmed. At home, Italy suffered bombings, food shortages, and mounting casualties. The myth of Mussolini's invincibility began to crumble. His charisma could no longer hide his regime's incompetence. In July 1943, after the Allies invaded Sicily, the fascist Grand Council turned against him. He was arrested by royal order, and Italy signed an armistice with the Allies. Mussolini's fall was not the end. In September 1943, Hitler sent elite troops to rescue him from captivity in a dramatic raid on a mountaintop hotel. The Germans installed him as the head of the Italian Social Republic in the north, a puppet state under Nazi control. But Mussolini was a shadow of his former self. Tired, disillusioned, and deeply aware of his failure, he watched as his country descended into civil war. Resistance fighters battled fascist forces, cities burned, the once unified Italy now bled from within. By April 1945, Mussolini's reign was over. With Allied forces closing in and German troops retreating, he attempted to escape to Switzerland with his mistress, Clara Petacci, disguised as a German soldier. But they were captured by partisans near Lake Como. On April 28th, Mussolini and Petacci were executed by firing squad. The next day, their bodies were taken to Milan and hung upside down in Piazzale Loreto, the same square where his regime had once executed anti-fascists. It was a grim, symbolic conclusion to a life marked by power, violence, and collapse. The legacy of Benito Mussolini is deeply controversial. To some, he remains a nationalist who brought order to chaos. To most, he is remembered as a tyrant, a man who promised greatness but delivered war, repression, and ruin. He pioneered many of the techniques later used by other dictators, controlling the media, building a cult of personality, using violence to silence opposition, and dismantling democracy from within. His alliance with Hitler dragged Italy into catastrophe and left deep scars that still linger. Mussolini's rise shows how quickly a democracy can fall. His rule shows how seductive power can become when fear, nationalism, and propaganda are used to blind a nation. As we close this chapter, remember that history is more than names and dates. It's about people, their choices, their hopes, their mistakes. Mussolini's story is not just a warning from the past. It's a mirror for the present. It reminds us to remain vigilant, to question authority, and to cherish democracy and truth. Thank you for joining this journey, both through the life of Mussolini and through the English language. History teaches us not only what happened, but what can happen again unless we learn.